This episode has been brought to you in part by the Azrieli Music Prizes, celebrating 10 years of promoting excellence in music composition. Come experience the musical imaginations of AMP's 4 extraordinary 2024 laureates. The Orchestre Symphonique de Montréal Chorus and Maestro Andrew McGill give the world premiere of their prize-winning works for the AMP Gala concert on October 28th at Maison Symphonique in Montreal. Learn more at azrielifoundation.org/AMP.
And one kid gets up and says, when I grow up, I want to be a Jew killer, to raucous applause and laughter. Now, this kid knew that I was Jewish. I was his friend. We grew up together.
Hello, and welcome to Riv Kush. Today, my guest, and I'm so thrilled, is Dr. Gad Saad. He is a professor of marketing at Concordia University, but I believe you're on a pause for a little bit. He has also been a visiting professor at Cornell, Dartmouth, and the University of California, Irvine. And we're very pleased to announce that he is visiting professor and global ambassador at Northwood University. And I also heard from a friend of mine who is a huge fan of yours, that we do have another thing in common in that you love dogs and you don't like the Beatles.
Both true statements.
I am with you on that.
Thank you. Thank you. Finally, a sane person.
Exactly. So thank you so much. And,
Pleasure.
I wanted to kick it off with talking a little bit about your experiences and your family's experiences as a Jew of Lebanese descent, which I think, given the current state of affairs right now, is really first and foremost, with what's going on with Lebanon and so on. So if you can just share a bit about that with me.
Sure. First, thank you so much for having me. Thank you for that lovely introduction. So we meaning my immediate family, were part of the last remaining group of Jews in Lebanon. At one point, Lebanon had thriving community would be maybe stretching the term, but certainly there were quite a few Lebanese Jews in the many thousands that lived in Lebanon. But then as things became a bit more precarious in terms of being Jewish in Lebanon, you would see an exodus of Jews, including my extended family. So my grandparents left to Israel in 1970. Many of my aunts and uncles left well before the Civil War, but my immediate family had steadfastly refused to leave Lebanon because we were well entrenched in Lebanese society. And then, unfortunately, in 1975, the Lebanese Civil War broke out, where it really became impossible to be Jewish in Lebanon. So we were there for the first year of the Civil War, and we were lucky to be able to eventually flee Lebanon. And then we emigrated to Montreal, Canada. If you'd like, I can share with you some of the realities of growing up Jewish in Lebanon, even before the Lebanese Civil War, if that interests you.
It absolutely interests me. So please.
So the reason why I mention this is because, people will often say, well, Lebanon was the Paris of the Middle East. It was progressive and it was tolerant. And that has some timber of truth to it. But again, it's always in the context of the Middle East, right? So tolerance is not sort of the universal capital T tolerance. It's tolerance in the Middle Eastern sense.
Right.
So that, yes, we know that you're Jewish. We tolerate you until, of course, we don't, in which case you better put on some really good running shoes and run real fast and hopefully outrun the ones who want to catch you. So it's not as though I lived free of Jew hatred in Lebanon. And I tell all this in the first chapter of The Parasitic Mind, which was my 2020 book, where I'm trying to talk about what happens to a society that is perfectly organized along identity politics lines, because Lebanon is the perfect model of that, right? Who sits in parliament, is dependent on what your religion is. Whether you're going to be president or prime minister depends on your religion. Everything is viewed through the prism of your religious identity. So in that sense, it is the perfect example of identity politics. And so in 1970, Gamal Abdel Nasser, who was the president of Egypt at the time, and highly appreciated and revered pan-Arabist, meaning that he was trying to unite all of the Arabs into one grand, pan-Arabic movement. So he was very much of a populist. He passed away in 1970, and as so often happens in the Middle East, but now we see it on university campuses in the West, there are these really sort of violent, feverish protests where people, will scream out all kinds of things. And one of the things I remember as a 5-year-old boy, I hadn't yet turned 6, as people were proceeding down our street lamenting the passing of Abdel Nasser, they were screaming, "Death to Jews, death to Jews." And as a 5-year-old boy, I turned to my mother. I'm thinking, why are they screaming this? And she's saying, "Just put your head down, shut up, be quiet." So that was my first exposure of what it was, vivid exposure and episodic memory of what it is to be Jewish. Fast forward, I'll tell 2 additional stories, and then we can drill down as much as you'd like. When I was about maybe 9 or almost 10, so before the start of the Civil War, the teacher had asked us to stand up and, say in a few sentences what we want to be when we grow up. So, person gets up, I want to be a doctor, I want to be a fighter pilot, I want to be a soccer player. And one kid gets up and says, when I grow up, I want to be a Jew killer. To raucous applause and laughter. Now, this kid knew that I was Jewish. I was his friend. We grew up together. And third story, my brother had been a Lebanese judo champion for several years in a row. And at one point, in a culture of honor and shame, I guess it was perceived as shameful that a Jew was consistently winning in these combat sports, in this case in judo. And so he was approached by some men who explained to him that it was time for him to, retire, lest there might be an accident that happens to him. And that he ended up actually leaving Lebanon. This is prior to the Civil War. To the Civil War, he moved to Paris, France, where he pursued his judo career there. Now, the irony, to complete that story, in 1976, after we had emigrated to Canada, if you might remember, the Montreal Olympics happened in Montreal, Canada. Well, yes. he ended up representing Lebanon in the Montreal Olympics. So the same guy who suffered from the terminal disease called being Jewish a few years earlier, and therefore had to flee Lebanon to pursue his judo career, we can overlook the fact that he was Jewish when it came to representing Lebanon and carrying the Lebanese flag. So that's what it means to be progressive and tolerant in the Paris of the Middle East.
Oh my goodness, that's a lot. I think it's a lot. And I think people do need to hear that, because we tend to look at the Middle East through the lens of the diaspora, through the lens of Western culture. And when you're talking about these things that happened, it's also not something in like the, way back in history. It's recent history, because as you're saying it, I happen to know that you're only a year older than me. So I picture like I remember things that happened to me when I was 9, 10, and you carry that with you, and just processing that is a lot. And when you said it was your friend, that just struck me. It's like a, forgive me, and you can correct me, it's almost like a conditional friendship. That's that small t tolerance that you referred to, that your friend displayed.
Yeah, exactly. And incidentally, I have, how when you're in elementary school, you have class photos.
Yes.
Right. I have, and as I'm saying this, I'm getting goosebumps. I have several years of photos where I see him there, right? Like, I know exactly which guy it was. So it's quite rough. As if it weren't enough what I told you, because you when I finished recounting the story, you said, "That's a lot. Let me hit you with some more. You ready?"
Okay. Yeah, I hope so.
I mean, I could probably keep you here for another 40 hours telling you stories, but let me just hit you with two other quick ones because I think those stories, we are a storytelling animal, right? So I can tell you all sorts of abstract realities, right? Theoretical realities. What does the Quran say about Jews, right? Okay, and
Mhm.
that's true, that's valid, but narrating a personal story is what sticks with people, right? And so
Right.
that's why I think my personal story has resonated with so many people. The day that we left Lebanon, I call this the full circle of the Star of David. Uh, because it's going to start in Lebanon, but it's going to end about 2 weeks after October 7th. So
Okay.
in the day that we left Lebanon, as we literally were flying outside of Beirut, the pilot, the captain, announced that we were now outside of Lebanese airspace. At which point, my mother took out a pendant, a Star of David high thing, and it put it around my neck and said, "Now you can wear this, not hide your identity, and be proud
I,
of who you are." Now,
oh,
let's fast forward to 2 weeks, roughly about 2 weeks after October 7th, and you can probably go do a search. The post is still up there. I don't delete any of my tweets. My wife and one of our children, my son, they had just returned. My wife had picked him up in the east end of Montreal, where he had just played a soccer match, and they were coming to pick me up at the local cafe where I was working on my laptop. And as I got into the car, my son said to me, "Daddy, if you were wearing a Star of David where I just played soccer, you'd be dead." So in 1975, we leave Lebanon, and my mother says you could now wear the Star of David. In 2023, my son, who's almost the exact same age as I was when my mother put the Star of David around my neck, tells me in Montreal, Canada, you shouldn't wear the Star of David. That doesn't bode too well for the future of Jews. Oh, I got you speechless there.
yeah. It hurts, actually.
Yeah, well, that's why I fight, by the way, because
Yeah.
I thought that I had been, when what is that sign in your mirror? It's objects can be closer than they appear,
Yeah, exactly.
right?
Something like that. Yes.
Something like that. I always get it mixed up.
Me too.
Well, all that stuff had been way back in my rear view mirror. I moved to Canada, and there'd be these little,
Yeah.
very banal incidents, but I felt it was a movie that was in my past. By the way, I
Right.
shouldn't call it a movie because for about 25 years after escaping Lebanon, I haven't had many of these nightmares recently. And I talk about this in the Parasitic Mind. I would have a recurring nightmare very frequently and it would take one of two forms. It's either the bad guys are coming to the house to take us away and my gun would jam, or I run out of ammunition. And one day I was telling that story to the gentleman who literally killed Osama bin Laden, uh, Rob O'Neill, who had come on my show to chat. And he says, "Oh, this is actually a dream that we often have in the military, and it's called the warrior dream. The only difference
Yes.
is, at least he is actually
In the military.
in the
Like
military.
yes,
He's got
yes, yeah.
very tough guys that can protect them.
Yeah.
I was just an 11-year-old, a 10 and 11
Yeah.
year old sitting duck. And so the reason why I speak out is because I know, right? I don't have the luxury of having grown up in the West thinking
The
that what we have in the West is the default society across the world. And that's why, by
right.
the way, as I often like to remind people, some of the staunchest defenders of the West are usually immigrants who have sampled from the buffet of societies outside the West. And so we're the ones who stand on top of the mountain and say, don't take your freedoms for granted because you don't want to see what's out there. And so this
Exactly.
is why I can't keep quiet, because I do have children. I might be able to outrun them, outrun the bad guys in terms of my life expectancy, but my children and their children won't. And therefore I have to speak.
Exactly. And I thank you for that, because you're right. You share a different perspective that actually it feels more realistic to me, because those of us who did grow up in this bubble of Canada or this bubble of the US don't get it. And I think because of that, we tend to try and apply our our Canadian, North American solutions to a land that thinks differently,
Yeah.
and feels differently and intellectualizes differently. So it's almost like we try and put this square peg into a round hole. And we often need people who have lived it, or whose families have lived it, to say, this is not going to work. This is not how you resolve what you need to resolve, if you can. And that actually leads me to, because Lebanon, Lebanon in my house has always been a topic of conversation, because my equal other, he's Israeli, and he was a Golani soldier who fought in the first Lebanon war. So it does tend to come up every now and then. And of course, now even more so, because of the fact that while all eyes were on Gaza, I can only speak to my household, our eyes were on the north. It's like, guys, it's tick, 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 tick. And now it's even louder. What are your thoughts around what is going on right now from your lens?
So sure, I can comment about Nasrallah, being taken out, but okay, there's I think a bigger story, and that is, you were mentioning earlier that, hey, this is not something that's happened 500 years ago. It's stuff that we're seeing within our lifetime. So to that point, demography is truly destiny, and I often try to remind people, well, Lebanon had historically been a Christian majority country, right?
Yes, which
Now,
I
so
don't think people realize that.
right. And so one of the reasons why there was greater tolerance. Now, this is, by the way, in no way meant to imply that the Christians don't have, and certainly the Arab Christians don't have, their own very nasty and virulent form of Jew hatred. But I think in their case, it's because they take on what's called the dhimmi. I call it the dhimmi psychology. Dhimmi
Oh,
are the religious minorities that are, quote, tolerated until they're not tolerated in Islamic lands.
yes.
And so one of the ways that I demonstrate, hey guys, don't take me out and behead me, is that I will show even greater hatred to the Jew than you do, because that shows that I'm really part of the community. So,
Mhm.
but that notwithstanding, Lebanon, to the extent that it was, quote, tolerant and progressive, is precisely because it had been at one point, it was a French protectorate, and it was a Christian majority country. Now, it didn't take 1,000 years for Lebanon to flip and become an Islamic majority country. It happened before my eyes, in the way that you watch paint dry. That's how quickly it happened. So the bigger story in Lebanon, I think, I mean, yes, there are immediate things that we could talk about, how Hezbollah has taken over Lebanon, blah, blah, blah. But the fact that, Lebanon is a failed state for many reasons, one of which is because, as I said, the demographic realities, the corruption, and so on. So it pains me because, I'm very Jewish in terms of my heritage, but I'm also Lebanese. So if people ask me, oh, you have a particular look to you, where are you from? I don't say I'm Jewish, because I understand that to mean, oh, I say I'm Lebanese, right?
Yes.
Our mother tongue is Arabic, not Hebrew, right? We eat Lebanese food. We listen to Lebanese music, right? And so one of the biggest regrets I have in my life is that not only I've never been able to return to Lebanon for obvious reasons, but also that my children have never seen Lebanon. My children don't speak Arabic well, if at all. I mean, they understand a little bit here and there. That pains me. Now, of course, I would also want them to learn Hebrew and visit Israel. Much of my extended family is there. But the tragedy for me of Lebanon is that there is no conceivable pathway that I can think of where within my lifetime, inshallah, may I live to be 1,000, where I'll ever be able to go back to Lebanon and show them the beauty of the country, right? For all of the ugliness, there are elements of Lebanese society that are astounding. The hospitality, the warmth, the joie de vivre. Lebanese are partiers. Lebanese are big. They're mercantile in that they're great business people. If you forgive me for saying, the Lebanese women are arguably the most beautiful women. Maybe I've been paid to say that because I'm married to a Lebanese woman. But there are a million reasons why one should be proud of Lebanon, and all this is gone because in this case, you've got some really nasty folks that have a chokehold on Lebanon. So in that sense, I think in French you say bon débarras, good riddance. Not that even for someone as nasty as Nasrallah, I never wish to, dance on someone's grave. But the quicker that the Lebanese society can return to truly being a pluralistic society, my God, the potential in that region is truly limitless.
This is an audition to be a cantor.
But I don't want to be a cantor.
I wasn't raised with any religion. You're Jewish, though.
The heartbeat of
I welcome Sam into my community by first taking his foreskin and next showing him the beautiful Twister bagel.
Culturally Jewish is the only podcast covering the weird, wide world of independent Canadian Jewish art.
Listen to Culturally Jewish at the cjn.ca/culture or wherever you get your podcasts.
You said watching it switch to a majority Islamic was like watching paint dry, and it was a very short period of time. I think flipping, and you can correct me, to a more pluralistic society in the Lebanon that it can be is going to be much longer.
Yeah, absolutely.
Much longer, because the roots have just taken hold of all the things that you've mentioned. And I think it will be quite a thing. And I think people do tend to look at surface and say, oh, Hezbollah, we got the guy. And then it's like, and kind of do, wash their hands, say, okay, it's good. And not recognizing that you've just eliminated, it's just the beginning. Do you follow me? Like,
oh, absolutely.
Am I making sense? That it's like, it's not, and we're done.
Yeah. So,
right?
I mean, look, I mentioned what I'm about to say. I also mentioned it in the book. So there's this game that I've coined called 6 Degrees of Jew. And so basically the game is, and I'm going to link it to Lebanon in a second. The game is basically, I propose any calamity to you, and then you've got up to 6 causal links to demonstrate why it's the fault of the Jew. Well, it sounds like I'm being humorous and facetious, but it's actually very powerful because, Lebanon, again, for all of its, quote, progressive nature and tolerance, was very much a 6 Degrees of Jew society, right? Your wife cheated on you. Well, who she probably learned about cheating on you through porn. Who are the peddlers of porns? Of course, it's the Jews. Your aunt just got diabetes. Well, who has the cure for diabetes yet refuses to release the cure?
Oh my gosh!
Who runs the pharmaceutical industries? It's the Jews. They're greedy, right? And they're the ones who are the famous physicians and scientists, and therefore they are literally choking us by not releasing it. So it's sunny outside today. It's too hot. It's the Jew. It's rainy. It's the Jew. Now, by the way, it is so pervasive in the Middle East that even animal disasters are attributed to the diabolical Jews. So, for example, you might remember that many years ago in Sharm el-Sheikh, which is an area on the Red Sea, a tourist area in Egypt, there were a couple of shark attacks
Yes.
Do you remember that? Well,
Yes.
I bet you didn't know that those sharks were Jewish sharks that were
Of
trained.
course they were.
Exactly. They were trained by Israel because that was a way to then harm the tourism economy of Egypt, right? So it sounds as though I'm being flippant when I say that, but that's how the society operates. Goddamn Jew. The biggest insult you can, and it's not goddamn Zionist. It's goddamn Jew. Right? And so the reason why that society can never heal itself is because as long as your foundational definitional metric is the hatred of the Jew that oils. I always joke that if you want to really get a green energy source, just try to harvest the Jew hatred in the Middle East because it is an infinitely renewable fuel source. So get rid of all that nonsense. Don't teach children straight out of the womb that the Jew is a diabolical creature, and then maybe Lebanon could have a prettier future.
Yeah, but do you find though that we are saying this Jew hatred in the Middle East, but it feels like it's been transported, like it's been packed up in luggage and brought to Europe and brought to Canada, and just, it feels so pervasive and has become like just this mindset that
Well, it's normalized, right?
normalized. That's the word I was looking for. That's it.
Exactly. So look, one of the reasons for, I mean, you were kind enough to mention my new affiliation. One of the reasons why I felt very much compelled to take a leave of absence from Concordia and go to Northwood. I mean, Northwood, independently of the reality at Concordia, was a very exciting project that I wanted to be involved in, but it certainly made it easier for me to accept this wonderful opportunity, given the fact that I was very, very concerned about going back on campus at Concordia. Now, imagine if the average student who's Jewish, but who is completely anonymous, right? When, as he or she is walking on campus, people don't know that person is Jewish, and they're feeling incredibly threatened. Well, what do you think I feel? I'm not anonymous and I'm not unknown, and so therefore, but this is happening in the 21st century in Montreal, Canada, right? So that, the proverbial, canary in the coal mine story, boy, does it apply here. If a Jewish professor is feeling sufficiently threatened that he thinks it's a much more attractive proposition to be a visiting professor elsewhere, that's not a good thing. And to your point, demography is destiny. You said the Jew hatred is coming in luggages. I mean, it literally is coming in luggages in the sense that if you import people in the hundreds of thousands, in some countries in the millions, where they're hailing from societies where endemic Jew hatred is not some small but significant minority. It's so I'll give you an example. The Pew Surveys, Pew Surveys, is a nonpartisan global survey that administers all sorts of surveys around the world. Several years ago, they had done a survey in Islamic countries of people's responses to Jews. What are your views of Jews? Now, if I told you, Rivka, that 10% of the sampled people had abhorrent views of the Jews, that would be alarming. 10% is a lot. But if I tell you that the numbers are in the 95 to 99% of surveyed people, these are scientific surveys. So imagine that statement. I survey, by the way, and my homeland of Lebanon was included in that survey. And I think their number was 98% or 99%. I can't remember. So if you have people who are stemming from societies where nearly to the last person surveyed, your attitude towards the Jew is a terrible one. And now you import such people into your country. Do you need a fancy professor, an evolutionary scientist to explain to you that you're likely to have an increase in Jew hatred in the whole society? What could be clearer? Gravity couldn't be as clear as that. But yet
exactly,
people shake their head and go, what explains this Jew hatred? How, I mean, who knows? Well, I think it's a pretty easy explanation. So that's why demography is destiny. That's why, people, of course, in this case, imbeciles will say, oh, but you're an immigrant, Professor Saad. Aren't you a hypocrite for railing against immigration? Well, that's like saying Ted Bundy is a man and he was put to death, and my dad is a man. So they're both men. So why do you hate Ted Bundy so much?
Yeah, it's a false equivalency.
Right. I mean, right. Can you be so bereft of logic that has to recognize that not all immigrants are created equal? Yes, Elon Musk is an immigrant, but Elon Musk doesn't want to eradicate Jews. So these are kinds of the problems that we're facing in the West. And by the way, that's why I wrote The Parasitic Mind, because that's what happens when a brain is completely parasitized by ideological rapture.
Yeah. And when I notice if people point out that logic or that truth, because you're right, it's not anecdotal, it's not it's fact, it's black and white. So if we can believe fact about, the sun rising and setting, why are we so challenged about facts? Why don't I have this expression? Well, maybe it's not my expression, but when people tell you who they are, believe them, full stop, right? But yet we are sometimes, I'm trying to soften it because I can be harsh. We are sometimes a society that is so worried about being politically correct that we lose our sense of common sense. And I've even had that political correctness I'm not going to, almost against me as a person of color, where I say, first of all, why are you being offended for me? Because I'm not. So it's like, or they'll say, oh my gosh, you can't say that, Rivka, about people of color. And I say, I'm one, right? Like just this weirdness. I'm a Gen Xer. Like, we said what we meant and we meant what we said. And I sometimes have a real hard time navigating this correctness when it's like part of not owning what is happening is part of the reason we are where we are.
Exactly. So in The Parasitic Mind, what I demonstrated is what happens to our cognitive system, our thoughts, when it is parasitized by a whole bunch of bad ideas. In my forthcoming book, which I'm currently feverishly working on, tentatively titled, but I'm pretty sure that the title will stick. It's called Suicidal Empathy. In a sense, it's part 2 of The Parasitic Mind, because if The Parasitic Mind was what happens to your cognitive system when it is parasitized, suicidal empathy is what happens to your affective system, your emotional system, when it is parasitized, right? So it becomes more important. So the number one thing that you should optimize if you are suicidally empathetic is the currency of empathy, right? So to say that Venezuelan illegal gang members should not be allowed to crash American borders, that is simply wrong, because Venezuelans also deserve to live the American dream, right? To criticize tenets of Islam because they are profoundly incongruent with Western values is simply empathetically wrong and icky and gauche, because you shouldn't be criticizing someone else's religion. No, I judge, right? Because I have the capacity to discriminate between good ideas and bad ideas. In accepting the position at Northwood University, I had to go through a process to get a visa. now I'm Canadian. I'm a well-known professor who defends American values, yet because I'm a law-abiding citizen, I had to take physically my doctoral diploma from Cornell University to the border in order to legally work in the United States. So by which stretch of logic do I have to go through that process? But 20 million illegal immigrants can come and crash the society, and it would be wrong and racist of me to be concerned about that. So the quicker that we can inoculate people's minds, and the quicker we could inoculate their emotional system from succumbing to suicidal empathy, the quicker we can return to the beauty of our Western tradition.
Couldn't have said it better. Wow. I can't wait for this book. The title alone grabbed me. That's why I went, whoa.
Thank you. Well, you know, the book is only, slated to come out in 2026. But to your point about it grabbing you, because I've mentioned it on a few occasions on social media, and I've seen how viral it's gone. I mean, I could literally do a search on suicidal empathy and it's everywhere. And so I've been telling my publisher that I maybe need to work a bit harder on it.
Yeah, you're going to have to pick up your pace.
I got to pick up my pace and stop slacking around.
2026 is not going to cut it.
Exactly.
Oh my gosh. This is, I'm cognizant of your commitments. You are a very busy person. I thank you so much for this. One last comment I want to make. Please. Because I'm under the impression that you're culturally Jewish.
Yes.
So what does that look like to you?
Okay. Look,
because we're coming into the high holidays. My mind is all filled with high holidays.
Look, you're right that I'm culturally Jewish, but that doesn't mean that I don't adhere or engage in some of the religious elements. But I don't practice those religious elements religiously, if I can put it that way.
I love that.
So, and I've only mentioned this a few times, but since you've given me the lead in, I'll mention it here. When I was a doctoral student at Cornell, I became very good friends with the Chabad rabbi there, whom I actually recently met up again with his wife. His name is Rabbi Eli Silberstein, and we became friends, and I would go to their house for Shabbat dinners and so on. And towards the end of my time at Cornell, prior to graduating, he once approached me with a request. And usually when the rabbis approach you with a request, fasten your seatbelts, it's coming. I said, oh Rabbi, what is it? He said, can you do me a favor? You have such a, they always put it in nice, you have such a pure Jewish soul, blah, blah, blah. Is there any way I can get you to put on tefillin every day? And I actually made him that promise. And from 1994 to which is when I graduated, to about 2004, 2005. So about a 10, 11 year period, I put on tefillin every single day. So it's not as though I'm averse to engaging in religious, but frankly, and this may disappoint some of your audience, I do it for earthly reasons. In other words, we are part of a people that has a shared history. That's absolutely true. Now, yes, you can argue that is rooted in a religious heritage, but I don't necessarily take seriously the fact that the Shabbat candles have to be lit at 7:21. But if I do it at 7:22, look out, I'm a bad person. So I practice those things as a reminder of my heritage, not necessarily because I'm wedded to every single element of the religious tenets. I don't know if that disappoints you as an answer, but
it does. Oh, it disappoints me. Okay, so now we have loves dogs, doesn't like the Beatles, and share similar views in terms of being.
We're done.
In terms of how you're Jewish, Right. So absolutely not. I think this. I can speak for myself. This has been fantastic for me.
Thank you.
To speak to you.
Likewise.
And I'm going to put it out there. If people haven't read it, they need to get The Parasitic Mind. And you need to inundate Dr. Saad's Instagram with requests for suicidal empathy, ideally before, the middle of, let's give them till the middle of 2025.
Okay.
Let's make it through the rest of 2024.
Fair enough. I'll do my best.
So, and I thank you so much for being my guest today.
Thank you. Real
my
pleasure.
goodness.
I appreciate it. And Shana Tova.
Shana Tova. Riv Kush is hosted by me, Rivka Campbell. We're produced and edited by Michael Freeman and the CJN Podcast Network. Our theme music is by Westside Gravy. If you like this episode, please subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. To support our work and everything else the CJN does, visit thecjn.ca/donate to make a monthly donation and receive a charitable tax receipt. Thanks for listening.